The Galactic Council's newest research station, Deep Space Observatory 17, floated in the quiet void between star systems like a metal flower blooming in darkness. Its gleaming corridors housed the finest minds from across known space, all working together to push the boundaries of scientific knowledge. Dr. Zephira Kethnine, a crystalline Vorthan with skin that sparkled like crushed diamonds, had spent the last 3 cycles organizing the most ambitious experiment in galactic history. The station's main laboratory buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 12 different species made final preparations. Towering Krillian engineers with their 6 arms moved like graceful dancers, adjusting massive gravity manipulation devices. Small, quick-nipple researchers scurried between consoles, their fur standing on end with excitement. The Serpentine S-Slath coiled around their workstations, golden eyes fixed on holographic displays showing impossible mathematical equations. At the center of it all stood Marcus Chen, the only human aboard the station. Marcus looked perfectly ordinary by human standards. Average height, dark hair that refused to stay neat, and hands that bore the calluses of someone who preferred building things to just thinking about them. He wore the same standard-issue research uniform as everyone else, though his seemed to accumulate grease stains faster than the others. What made him extraordinary was not his appearance, but the fact that he was the first member of his species to be invited to work alongside the galactic scientific community. Humans had only made contact with galactic civilization 18 months ago. Their planet, designated as Earth in their own language, sat in what most civilized species considered the absolute worst neighborhood in the galaxy. The system was located in the Orion Spiral, a region so dangerous that most species wouldn't send unmanned probes there, let alone establish colonies. The local star was unstable, the asteroid fields were dense with debris, and the gravity wells were all wrong. Worse yet, Earth orbited in what scientists called the Goldilocks zone, that narrow band where liquid water could exist. This zone was also known as the Deathworld sweet spot, where a planet received just enough radiation to create the most violent, unpredictable weather patterns in known space. Despite these seemingly impossible conditions, humans had not only survived but thrived. They had developed technology, art, literature, and science. They had even begun reaching into space with primitive chemical rockets when the galactic community finally noticed them. The discovery had sent shockwaves through academic circles everywhere. No species had ever evolved sentience on a Deathworld before. It was considered scientifically impossible. Dr. Kethnine had been among the scientists selected to make first contact, and she had spent months studying human behavior, physiology, and psychology. What she found defied every principle of evolutionary biology she had ever learned. Humans were stronger than they looked, faster than they had any right to be, and showed a disturbing tendency to find danger exciting rather than terrifying. They had reflexes that bordered on precognitive healing rates that impressed even the Krillians, and a pain tolerance that made veteran soldiers uncomfortable. Most disturbing of all was their problem-solving methodology. When faced with a challenge, most species would analyze the situation, consult historical data, run computer simulations, and develop a careful, methodical approach. Humans would look at the same problem and say things like, "Hold my beer," or "Watch this," before attempting solutions that ranged from brilliant to absolutely insane. Marcus had impressed everyone during his first week aboard the station by fixing a critical life support malfunction that had stumped the engineering team for days. He had crawled into a maintenance shaft barely wide enough for his shoulders, worked in complete darkness with plasma conduits sparking inches from his head, and emerged 3 hours later with a solution so elegantly simple that the engineers were embarrassed they hadn't thought of it themselves. "The key," Marcus had explained while casually brushing electrical burns off his hands, "is not to overthink it. Sometimes the best approach is the most direct one." The Krillian chief engineer had required medical attention after witnessing Marcus work in conditions that should have killed him instantly. Now, 6 weeks later, Marcus had become an unofficial mascot for the research team. His presence made everyone nervous in a way they couldn't quite explain, but his insights had accelerated their research by months. He approached problems with a combination of intuition and reckless courage that produced results no computer model could predict. The current experiment was designed to test a new form of faster-than-light communication using quantum entanglement on a massive scale. The theory was sound, but the practical applications required generating a controlled spatial distortion that would either revolutionize galactic communication or tear a hole in local spacetime. The mathematical models showed a 97% chance of success, with the remaining 3% representing what scientists politely called complete annihilation of everything within a 12-light-year radius. Most species would have considered these odds unacceptable. The research team had voted to proceed only after extensive safety protocols were put in place, including evacuation procedures and fail-safe mechanisms that could shut down the experiment instantly if anything went wrong. Marcus had voted in favor of the experiment, but his reasoning had made everyone deeply uncomfortable. "Look," he had said during the final planning meeting, "you've run the numbers 1,000 times. You've built in every safety measure you can think of. You've prepared for every possible failure scenario. At some point, you just have to flip the switch and see what happens." Dr. Kethnine's crystalline features had shifted into what humans would recognize as a worried expression. "But Marcus, the risk of catastrophic failure is 3%, Marcus had interrupted with a grin that made several researchers take unconscious steps backward. "That means we have a 97% chance of making history. I like those odds." The S-Lath representative had coiled tighter around her workstation. "But if the experiment fails catastrophically, then we'll deal with it," Marcus had said with the casual confidence of someone discussing the weather. "That's what humans do. We figure it out as we go." Now, as the final countdown began, Marcus stood at his monitoring station with the same relaxed posture he might use while waiting for coffee to brew. His instruments showed him energy readings that were climbing toward levels that had never been achieved in controlled laboratory conditions. Spatial distortion meters flickered between normal and measurements that shouldn't be possible. Quantum field generators hummed with power that could have lit a small city. Dr. Kethnine moved between workstations, checking readings and coordinating with teams across the station. Her crystalline skin had taken on a blue tint that indicated stress among her species. The other researchers showed similar signs of nervousness. Kryllian skin membranes had darkened to almost black. Nipple researchers were chattering in high-pitched frequencies that hurt sensitive ears. The S-Lath had coiled so tightly they looked like springs ready to explode. "All stations report ready," Dr. Kethnine announced, her voice carrying clearly through the laboratory's communication system. Marcus glanced at his instruments one final time, then looked around at his colleagues with the kind of smile that had preceded every major human advancement in recorded history. It was the same expression worn by the first human to rub two sticks together to make fire, by the Wright brothers before their first flight, by Neil Armstrong before stepping onto the moon. "Hey, everyone," Marcus called out in a cheerful voice that made every alien in the laboratory freeze with instinctive terror. "Watch this." Dr. Kethnine's crystalline features went completely transparent with shock. Around the laboratory, researchers from a dozen different species felt their survival instincts scream warnings that had been refined over millions of years of evolution. Every alien present suddenly understood, with perfect clarity, why humans were the only species to evolve sentience on a death world. Those two simple words, spoken with such casual confidence, triggered a primal fear response that transcended species barriers. Across the galaxy, the phrase, "watch this," when spoken by a human had become legendary. It was typically followed by achievements that defied physics, engineering marvels that shouldn't be possible, or spectacular disasters that somehow resulted in breakthrough discoveries. The countdown continued, but every non-human in the laboratory was now fighting the overwhelming urge to run for the nearest escape pod. They had all read the reports about human behavior patterns. They knew the statistics. When a human said, "watch this," the probability of something impossible happening increased by orders of magnitude. Marcus reached for the final activation control with the steady hand of someone who had never met a challenge he didn't want to face head-on. The quantum field generators reached peak power. Spatial distortion readings climbed past theoretical maximums. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath. "Initiating quantum entanglement cascade," Marcus announced, his voice still carrying that cheerful confidence that made everyone want to hide behind the nearest blast shield. He pressed the activation control. The universe exploded into impossible colors. The explosion of light that filled the laboratory was unlike anything in the recorded experience of galactic science. Colors that had no names danced across surfaces that suddenly seemed to exist in more dimensions than physics allowed. The air itself shimmered with energy patterns that made sensitive optical organs ache and forced several researchers to activate protective filters on their visual sensors. Dr. Kethnine's crystalline body resonated with harmonic frequencies that created an eerie musical tone, while around the laboratory, emergency systems activated in response to readings that exceeded every calibrated scale. Warning lights flashed in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Computer systems struggled to process data streams that violated basic mathematical principles. At the center of the chaos, Marcus Chen stood with his hands still on the control console, watching the impossible display with the fascination of a child seeing fireworks for the first time. His instruments showed readings that should have required the destruction of several star systems to generate, yet the station remained intact. More impossibly, the humans seemed to be interpreting the chaotic data streams with an intuitive understanding that left trained physicists speechless. Spatial distortion is holding steady at. Well, that can't be right, called out researcher Vex Prime, a tall Krillian whose usual composure had cracked under the strain of witnessing physics break down in real time. The numbers are showing localized space-time curvature that exceeds theoretical limits by several orders of magnitude. Quantum entanglement field is stable, reported Dr. SSS Kala, the S-Slath team leader, her serpentine form coiled tight with nervous energy. But the particle behavior patterns are completely outside known parameters. It's as if reality is rewriting itself at the quantum level. The small nipple researcher designated Fluffle7 was chittering in rapid bursts, his fur standing on end as he monitored energy containment systems. Containment fields are holding, but the power readings are impossible. The quantum generators are somehow producing more energy than they're consuming. Marcus looked up from his console with a grin that made everyone remember why humans were classified as an apex predator species. That's because we're not just creating quantum entanglement, he said, with the casual confidence of someone discussing a simple mechanical repair. We're tapping into zero-point energy fluctuations in local spacetime. The universe is basically helping us power the experiment. Dr. Kethnine felt her crystalline structure shift involuntarily as she processed what the human had just said. That's impossible. Zero-point energy extraction requires technology that theoretical physicists believe won't be developed for another 1,000 years. Maybe for most species, Marcus replied, adjusting controls with steady hands while reality warped around him. But humans have always been pretty good at making impossible things work. We just approach problems differently. As if to emphasize his point, one of the primary containment fields suddenly destabilized. Alarms shrieked as energy readings spiked beyond emergency thresholds. The carefully calibrated experiment was on the verge of becoming an uncontrolled explosion that would sterilize several star systems. Every alien researcher in the laboratory felt their survival instincts scream in perfect harmony. This was exactly the kind of catastrophic failure they had spent months designing safety protocols to prevent. The proper response was immediate shutdown of all systems, activation of emergency containment, and evacuation to minimum safe distance. Marcus reached for a different set of controls entirely. "What are you doing?" Dr. Kethnine shouted over the wailing alarms. "We need to initiate emergency shutdown." "No, we don't," Marcus called back, his voice carrying a strange combination of excitement and focus that every prey species in the galaxy had learned to fear. "We need to lean into it. The field instability isn't a failure, it's evolution. The system is trying to achieve a more efficient configuration." He began adjusting containment parameters in ways that made the monitoring computers issue warnings about violations of fundamental safety protocols. Instead of reducing power to stabilize the failing field, he was redirecting energy flow to amplify the instability in a controlled manner. "Marcus, stop!" Researcher Vex Prime's 6 arms moved in frantic coordination as he tried to override the human's commands. "You're increasing the risk of catastrophic failure exponentially." "I'm increasing the probability of unprecedented success," Marcus corrected, his fingers dancing across controls with the precision of a concert pianist. "Sometimes you have to risk everything to achieve something truly remarkable." The mathematical models that had taken months to calculate were being rewritten in real time as Marcus implemented changes that no computer simulation had predicted. He was flying blind into uncharted territory, guided only by intuition, and the peculiar human ability to function under pressure that would paralyze most sentient species. The failing containment field suddenly stabilized, but not in any configuration that appeared in the original design specifications. Marcus had essentially rebuilt the experiment while it was running, creating a hybrid system that combined planned engineering with improvised solutions that shouldn't have worked. "How did you know that would work?" Dr. Kethnine asked, her voice filled with the kind of scientific curiosity that had driven her species to explore the stars. Marcus paused in his work, considering the question with surprising seriousness. "I didn't know. I couldn't know. The math was too complex and the variables were changing too fast for conscious analysis, so I stopped trying to think my way through it and started feeling my way instead." "Feeling your way?" Dr. SSS Kala uncoiled slightly, her golden eyes fixed on the human with fascination. "You're saying you solved a quantum mechanics problem using intuition?" "More or less," Marcus admitted with a shrug. "Humans have always been good at pattern recognition, even when we can't consciously identify the patterns we're seeing. Sometimes the best solutions come from trusting your instincts instead of overthinking the problem." Around the laboratory, monitoring stations began registering readings that were unprecedented in galactic scientific history. The quantum entanglement field had not only stabilized, but had achieved coherence across spatial distances that theoretical models suggested were impossible. They weren't just communicating faster than light. They were creating a communication network that seemed to exist outside normal spacetime entirely. "We're getting response signals," Fluffle7 announced, his chittering taking on overtones of amazement. "The entanglement field is connecting with quantum fluctuations across multiple star systems simultaneously. It's as if we've created a communication web that spans hundreds of light years instantly." Dr. Kethnine moved to the main display console, her crystalline features shifting through colors that indicated profound excitement. The experimental results were beyond their most optimistic projections. They had achieved instantaneous communication across galactic distances, opened new possibilities for faster-than-light travel research, and gathered enough data to revolutionize physics for the next century. All because a human had looked at an impending disaster and said, "Watch this," before turning catastrophic failure into unprecedented success. "Marcus," Dr. Kethnine said quietly, "do you realize what you've accomplished? This experiment will change everything. Galactic communication, interstellar travel, quantum mechanics itself, nothing will ever be the same." Marcus looked up from his monitoring station, where he was calmly recording readings that would make him the most famous scientist in galactic history. His expression was the same casual satisfaction he might wear after fixing a broken appliance. "That's nice," he said with a smile that reminded everyone present why humans were the only species to achieve spaceflight while living on a planet that was actively trying to kill them. "So, what should we try next?" The silence that followed this question was so complete that the only sounds in the laboratory were the gentle hums of equipment that was redefining the laws of physics and the quiet sobbing of researchers who were beginning to understand what it meant to work alongside a species that viewed impossible challenges as entertainment. Dr. Kethnine realized that she was witnessing something that would be studied by xenobiologists for millennia to come. The human capacity for turning disaster into discovery wasn't just a cultural quirk or an evolutionary accident. It was a fundamental aspect of how their minds processed reality. Other species saw problems and tried to find safe, methodical solutions. Humans saw problems and asked, "What's the most interesting way this could possibly work out?" The implications were staggering. And somewhere in the back of her crystalline mind, Dr. Kethnine found herself wondering what Marcus would say if she showed him the classified files about the galactic civilization's greatest unsolved mysteries. Problems that had stumped the finest minds of a dozen species for thousands of years. She had a terrible feeling that he would look at challenges that had been deemed impossible by entire civilizations and respond with those two words that were rapidly becoming the most feared phrase in galactic science. "Watch this, /." 3 weeks after Marcus Chen had revolutionized galactic physics with an experiment that should have killed everyone within 12 light years, Deep Space Observatory 17 had become the most famous research station in known space. Scientists from across the galaxy were requesting transfers, hopping for the chance to work alongside the human who seemed to treat impossible problems like amusing puzzles. Marcus himself remained blissfully unaware of his growing reputation. He spent his days working on routine maintenance tasks, helping colleagues with research projects, and occasionally making observations that sent entire academic departments scrambling to rewrite textbooks. To him, it was just another job in just another laboratory, albeit one that happened to float in space and house colleagues with interesting anatomical variations. Dr. Keth9 had been monitoring galactic scientific communications, and the messages arriving at the station were growing more urgent by the day. The quantum entanglement network Marcus had created was providing unprecedented insights into cosmic phenomena. Researchers across the galaxy were detecting previously unknown energy patterns, discovering new forms of matter, and making contact with civilizations that had been considered unreachably distant. The breakthrough had also attracted unwanted attention from the Galactic Council's Department of Dangerous Technologies. Agent Thrix Omega arrived on a fast courier ship with credentials that made station commanders nervous and carrying files that were classified at levels most species weren't allowed to know existed. She was a Zellarian, tall and elegant with silver skin that seemed to shift like liquid metal and eyes that glowed with internal light. Her species specialized in investigation and analysis, and they had a well-deserved reputation for uncovering secrets that others preferred to keep hidden. "I need to speak with the human," she announced upon arriving at the station, her voice carrying harmonics that indicated serious authority. Dr. Keth9 received Agent Thrix Omega in her office, a comfortable space that overlooked the main laboratory through reinforced transparent aluminum windows. Below them, Marcus could be seen working with a team of nipple researchers on what appeared to be a simple equipment calibration project. "Agent Thrix Omega," Dr. Keth9 said, her crystalline features shifting to formal colors of respect. "I assume this visit concerns the quantum communication experiment." "Among other things," the agent replied, settling into a chair with fluid grace. "The Galactic Council is very interested in human behavioral patterns, particularly those that lead to what our analysts call impossible outcomes." Through the window, they watched Marcus crawl inside a maintenance conduit that was barely wide enough for his shoulders, emerging moments later with a device that should have required a complete shutdown of the laboratory's main power grid to access safely. "He does that sort of thing regularly," Dr. Keth9 observed. "Last week, he fixed a critical navigation error by rewiring the star charts database while it was actively calculating hyperspace coordinates. He said the problem was obvious once you looked at it from the right angle." Agent Thrix Omega made notes on a device that seemed to write with light itself. "Our behavioral analysts have been studying reports about humans since first contact. They display consistent patterns that violate established models of sentient decision-making processes, such as risk assessment calculations that prioritize potential benefits over probable dangers, problem-solving methodologies that incorporate variables most species would classify as impossible, and most significantly, a tendency to achieve successful outcomes despite employing approaches that mathematical models indicate should result in catastrophic failure." Dr. Keth9's crystalline form shifted to thoughtful blue tones. "You're saying that humans succeed because they ignore the reasons why they should fail." "More precisely," Agent Thrix Omega corrected, "they seem to operate under the assumption that failure is simply another variable to be incorporated into their solutions, rather than an outcome to be avoided." Below them, Marcus had moved to a different workstation where he was helping a Krillian engineer troubleshoot a gravitational field generator. The device had been producing unstable readings for weeks, resisting every attempt at repair. As they watched, Marcus performed what appeared to be a casual adjustment to the field harmonics. The generator immediately stabilized, producing the smoothest gravitational field readings anyone had seen in months. "How did he know to do that?" Agent Thrix Omega asked, leaning forward with professional interest. "He said the gravitational resonance patterns reminded him of a musical instrument that was slightly out of tune," Dr. Keth9 replied. "He applied principles from human music theory to quantum gravitational physics and somehow made it work." The agent made more notes. "Our analysts have identified 17 separate instances where humans have solved complex technical problems by applying knowledge from completely unrelated fields. They seem to find connections where other species see only chaos." "Is that why you're here? To study human problem-solving techniques?" Agent Thrix Omega's expression became more serious, her silver skin taking on darker tones that indicated concern. I'm here because the Galactic Council has files full of problems that have stumped our finest minds for centuries. Ancient technologies that no one understands. Mathematical theorems that appear to be unsolvable. Physical phenomena that seem to violate natural laws. Dr. Keth9 felt her crystalline structure shift involuntarily as she processed the implications. And they want Marcus to look at these problems. The Department of Dangerous Technologies maintains a collection of challenges that are considered too hazardous for normal research protocols. Technologies left behind by extinct civilizations, cosmic anomalies that defy explanation, scientific paradoxes that have driven researchers to madness. Problems that we've classified as unsurmountable. Through the window, Marcus had moved to yet another workstation, where he was examining a sensor array that had been providing inconsistent readings for months. He spent exactly 47 seconds studying the displays before reaching into the control panel and making what appeared to be a minor adjustment. The sensor array immediately began producing readings of unprecedented clarity and precision. 47 seconds, Agent Thrix Omega observed. Our top engineers have spent months trying to solve that calibration problem. Marcus said the sensor harmonics were fighting each other instead of working together, Dr. Keth9 explained. He applied principles from human conflict resolution to electromagnetic frequency management. The agent closed her notes and looked directly at Dr. Keth9 with glowing eyes that seemed to see through dimensions. Dr. Keth9, I need you to understand something. The problems in our files aren't simple technical challenges. They're mysteries that have been classified as fundamentally unsolvable. Ancient alien artifacts that destroyed everyone who tried to study them. Mathematical equations that seem to exist outside normal logic. Cosmic phenomena that appear to violate the basic structure of reality itself. And you want to show these to Marcus. The Galactic Council believes that human problem-solving methodologies might provide insights that traditional approaches have missed. But they also recognize that humans have a tendency to attempt solutions that other species would consider suicidal. Dr. Keth9 watched Marcus through the window as he moved between research stations, casually solving problems that had puzzled trained scientists for weeks. He worked with the relaxed confidence of someone who had never encountered a challenge he couldn't eventually overcome. Agent Thrix Omega, she said quietly, what exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to help us determine whether it's safe to show a human our most dangerous unsolved problems, or whether doing so would result in outcomes that could threaten galactic civilization itself. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus looked up from his work and noticed them watching him through the office window. He waved cheerfully and called out something that the sound-dampening systems prevented them from hearing clearly. But Dr. Keth9 was an expert at reading human lip movements, and she felt her crystalline structure go completely transparent with shock as she realized what Marcus had said. He had pointed at a classified technical manual that Agent Thrix Omega had left on the desk, clearly visible through the window, and formed two words that every species in the galaxy had learned to fear. Watch this. Agent Thrix Omega followed Dr. Keth9's gaze to the manual, then to Marcus, who was already moving toward the office with the purposeful stride of someone who had just spotted an interesting challenge. Is that manual about one of the classified problems? Dr. Keth9 asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Agent Thrix Omega nodded, her silver skin shifting to colors that indicated profound concern. It contains technical specifications for an ancient artifact known as the Paradox Engine. It's been studied by our finest researchers for over 3,000 years. No one has ever been able to determine its purpose or activate its systems safely. And Marcus just saw it through the window. Apparently so. They both turned to watch as Marcus approached the office door. His expression was the same combination of curiosity and confidence that had preceded every major breakthrough in human scientific history. It was also the same expression that had preceded every major disaster, which was what made working with humans so terrifying for other species. Dr. Keth9 realized that they were about to discover whether the human approach to impossible problems was a blessing for galactic civilization, or a threat to its continued existence. Marcus knocked on the office door with the polite courtesy of someone asking to borrow a cup of sugar from a neighbor. "Come in," Dr. Kethnine called, her voice carrying only the slightest tremor of species-wide existential dread. The door opened, and Marcus entered with the easy smile that had become famous across the galaxy. In his hands, he carried a collection of tools that shouldn't have been able to interact with technology from an extinct alien civilization. "Hi there," he said to Agent Thrix Omega with the casual friendliness that characterized all human social interactions. "I couldn't help noticing that manual you've got there. Is that the Paradox Engine documentation? Because if it is, I think I know what's been going wrong with your activation attempts." Agent Thrix Omega and Dr. Kethnine exchanged glances that communicated volumes about the peculiar terror of working alongside a species that treated galactic mysteries like crossword puzzles. "Marcus," Dr. Kethnine said carefully, "that artifact has been studied by the most brilliant minds in galactic history. No one has ever been able to understand how it works." Marcus glanced at the manual with the same casual interest he might show toward assembly instructions for furniture. "Well, sure, if you approach it like conventional technology, but look at these power distribution patterns. They're not trying to generate energy efficiently. They're trying to create localized paradoxes in space-time physics. It's not a machine at all. It's more like a musical instrument for reality itself." He set his tools down on Dr. Kethnine's desk with the confident motions of someone who had never met a problem he couldn't solve. "Mind if I take a look at the actual device?" The journey to the Galactic Council's maximum security research facility took 3 days through hyperspace aboard Agent Thrix Omega's courier ship. The facility itself was built inside a hollow asteroid that had been moved to an isolated system, specifically chosen for its distance from inhabited worlds. If something catastrophic happened during dangerous research, the destruction would be contained to an area where no civilizations would be affected. Marcus spent the journey reading through files that contained some of the most terrifying mysteries in galactic history. Ancient weapons that had wiped out entire star systems. Mathematical theorems that had driven researchers insane when they tried to solve them. Cosmic phenomena that seemed to exist outside the normal laws of physics. Technologies left behind by civilizations so advanced that their simplest devices were incomprehensible to modern science. He approached each file with the same cheerful curiosity he might show toward a cookbook, occasionally making notes in margins and asking questions that revealed insights no one had considered in thousands of years of study. "This entropy reversal chamber," Marcus said while reviewing a particularly dangerous artifact. "The previous researchers were trying to understand how it works by studying its effects on matter and energy, right?" Dr. Kethnine, who had insisted on accompanying the expedition, nodded her crystalline head. 17 different research teams have studied that device over the past 2 millennia. 3 teams suffered total casualties when the chamber activated unexpectedly. But nobody tried to figure out what it was designed to accomplish, Marcus continued, tapping the file with his finger. They were so focused on how it works that they never asked why it was built in the first place. Agent Thrix Omega looked up from her own reports, her silver skin shifting to colors that indicated professional interest. "What do you mean?" "Look at the energy signatures," Marcus explained, pointing to readings that had puzzled researchers for centuries. "This thing isn't revering entropy randomly. It's creating localized time eddies with specific mathematical properties. I think it was designed to preserve things, not destroy them. It's like a temporal storage device." Dr. Kethnine felt her crystalline structure shift to colors that indicated amazement. "A time storage device, but the energy requirements alone would be impossible using conventional technology," Marcus agreed. "But whoever built this understood something about temporal mechanics that we're still trying to figure out. They weren't fighting against entropy, they were using it as a tool." The courier ship dropped out of hyperspace near the research facility, and Marcus pressed his face to the observation port like a child seeing an amusement park for the first time. The asteroid facility was massive, honeycombed with laboratories and storage bays that contained some of the most dangerous objects in the known galaxy. "Wow," he said with genuine appreciation. "This is like the ultimate workshop for impossible problems." Agent Thrix Omega and Dr. Kethnine exchanged glances. Most researchers approached the facility with mixtures of excitement and terror. Marcus seemed to view it as an interesting vacation destination. The docking procedures took another hour, during which Marcus continued reading through classified files with enthusiasm that made his escort increasingly nervous. By the time they reached the facility's main laboratory complex, he had filled several notebooks with observations that would have redefined multiple scientific disciplines. Director Vox Eternal met them at the main entrance. She was an ancient Vorthan whose crystalline body had achieved the perfect clarity that came with centuries of accumulated wisdom. She had overseen the facility for longer than some civilizations had existed, and she had personally witnessed every major breakthrough and disaster in dangerous technology research. "Dr. Chen," she said with formal courtesy that carried undertones of species-wide apprehension, "welcome to the maximum security research facility. I trust Agent Thrix Omega has briefed you on our safety protocols." Marcus nodded politely while looking around the laboratory complex with obvious fascination. She mentioned that some of the artifacts here have killed previous research teams, but she also said you haven't made significant progress on understanding them, which suggests you've been prioritizing safety over investigation. Director Vox Eternal's crystalline features shifted to colors that indicated careful consideration. "Dr. Chen, these artifacts have been classified as unsurmountably dangerous for very good reasons. Perhaps we should begin with something less hazardous to demonstrate." "Actually," Marcus interrupted with the casual confidence that had become his trademark, "I'd like to start with the most dangerous one you've got. If I'm going to understand how these technologies work, I need to see what happens when they're operating at full capacity." The silence that followed this request was so profound that the only sounds in the laboratory were the quiet hums of containment systems and the distant vibrations of the asteroid's artificial gravity generators. "The most dangerous artifact we possess," Director Vox Eternal said slowly, "is designated the Reality Shaper. It has killed over 200 researchers across 14 different species. We haven't activated it in over 3 centuries because the last attempt resulted in the complete destruction of our previous research facility and everything within a 50-light-year radius." Marcus brightened visibly. "That sounds perfect. Can I see it?" Dr. Kethnine felt her crystalline structure go completely transparent with shock. Agent Thrix Omega's silver skin shifted through colors that indicated she was reconsidering every decision that had led to this moment. Director Vox Eternal remained perfectly still for several seconds, processing the implications of a human's request to examine their most dangerous unsolved mystery. "Dr. Chen," the director said carefully, "I'm not certain you understand the magnitude of risk involved. The Reality Shaper doesn't just kill researchers, it fundamentally alters the structure of local spacetime. The previous facility wasn't destroyed in an explosion. It was edited out of existence along with everything that had ever been inside it." "Okay," Marcus said with the same tone he might use to acknowledge that a particular tool required batteries. "That's definitely interesting. So it's not just manipulating matter and energy, it's rewriting the basic information that defines reality itself." "Precisely," Director Vox Eternal confirmed, "which is why we've classified it as fundamentally unsafe to study using any known methodology." Marcus considered this for a moment, his expression taking on the focused intensity that preceded every major human breakthrough. "But you've been trying to study it by observing its effects from outside its area of influence, right? Like trying to understand a storm by standing outside it and measuring the wind." "That analogy is approximately correct," Agent Thrix Omega confirmed. "All observation and measurement has been conducted from maximum safe distance using remote sensors." "Well, there's your problem," Marcus said with a grin that made everyone present remember why humans were classified as a Deathworlder species. "If it's rewriting reality, then you need to be inside the effect radius to understand what it's actually doing. Remote sensors can only tell you what reality looks like from the outside, not what it feels like to exist within the altered parameters." Director Vox Eternal's crystalline form shifted through colors that indicated profound concern. "Dr. Chen, what you're suggesting would require a researcher to position themselves within the artifact's area of effect while it's active. Based on historical data, this would result in immediate death or worse." "Maybe for most species," Marcus admitted, "but humans have always been pretty good at surviving in environments that should kill us, and we've definitely had lots of practice adapting to conditions that change faster than we can analyze them." He pulled out his notebook and began sketching diagrams that showed approaches to studying the reality shaper that no previous research team had ever considered. Instead of trying to observe the artifact safely from a distance, he was designing methodologies that assumed direct exposure to its reality-altering effects. The key, he explained while drawing increasingly complex diagrams, is not to resist the changes it makes to local spacetime, but to ride them like a surfer rides a wave. If you can maintain awareness and adaptability while reality shifts around you, then you can gather data about how the alterations are being implemented. Dr. Kethnine moved closer to examine Marcus's sketches, her scientific curiosity warring with her survival instincts. The diagrams showed a research approach that was either brilliantly innovative or completely insane, and possibly both. "Marcus," she said quietly, "what you're proposing is essentially using a human researcher as a measuring instrument inside a reality distortion field that has killed everyone who's ever been exposed to it." "Pretty much," Marcus agreed cheerfully. "But I'll be using protective equipment and safety protocols that are specifically designed to work with human adaptive capabilities rather than against them." He looked around the laboratory at the three aliens who were staring at him with expressions ranging from fascination to terror. "Look, I know this sounds dangerous." "Sounds dangerous," Agent Thrix Omega interrupted, her silver skin shifting through alarmed color patterns. "Marcus, what you're describing is guaranteed fatal according to every mathematical model we've developed." Marcus shrugged with the casual confidence that had characterized human exploration since the first person looked at a river and wondered what was on the other side. "Mathematical models have never been very good at predicting what happens when humans decide to try something new. We have a pretty solid track record of surviving things that should definitely kill us." Director Vox Eternal had been silent during this exchange, but now she moved to a secured communication console and began entering access codes that Dr. Kethnine recognized as classification levels she had never seen used before. "Dr. Chen," the director said without turning around, "I'm going to show you the reality shaper. But first, I need you to understand something that isn't in any of the files you've read." She completed her access sequence, and a holographic display activated above the console. It showed historical footage from the last time anyone had attempted to study the reality shaper directly. The images were difficult to process because they showed events that seemed to violate basic principles of cause and effect. Researchers approached the artifact in logical sequence, but the recording showed them moving backward and forward through time simultaneously. Their forms shifted between different states of existence. Some appeared to experience their entire lifespans in moments, aging and dying and being born again in cycles that hurt to watch. "The reality shaper doesn't just alter local spacetime," Director Vox Eternal explained. "It creates paradoxes in the fundamental structure of existence itself. Everyone who has been exposed to its effects has experienced temporal displacement, dimensional shifting, and ontological uncertainty." Marcus watched the footage with the same focused attention he had given to routine equipment manuals. When it ended, he was quiet for several moments, processing what he had seen. "Okay," he finally said, his voice carrying a note of genuine respect for the challenge ahead. "This is definitely more complex than I initially thought, but I think I see what's happening here." He turned to face the three alien researchers, his expression combining human determination with the kind of careful analysis that had allowed his species to survive on a planet that was constantly trying to kill them. "The reality shaper isn't malfunctioning. It's working exactly as designed. But it was built by beings who existed outside linear time and normal spatial dimensions. What looks like paradoxes and impossible effects to us were probably just routine operational parameters for its creators." Dr. Kethnine felt her crystalline structure shift to colors that indicated she was processing concepts at the edge of her comprehension. "Are you saying that the artifact was never meant to be operated by beings who exist within normal spacetime?" "I'm saying," Marcus replied with a smile that had preceded every major advancement in human history, "that we've been trying to use a multi-dimensional tool with three-dimensional thinking. But humans have always been pretty good at adapting to conditions that don't make sense." He looked directly at Director Vox Eternal with the expression that every species in the galaxy had learned to recognize as the prelude to events that would redefine their understanding of what was possible. So when can I try activating it? The reality shaper waited in the facility's most secure containment chamber, a vast spherical room lined with every protective technology that galactic science could provide. Force fields layered upon force fields created barriers that could stop anything short of stellar collapse. Temporal stabilizers worked to maintain linear causality within the chamber. Dimensional anchors prevented reality from shifting outside established parameters. Despite these protections, the chamber felt wrong in ways that transcended normal sensory perception. Space seemed to bend slightly around the artifact, creating visual distortions that hurt to look at directly. Time moved unevenly, with some areas experiencing minutes while others experienced hours. The laws of physics operated normally most of the time, but occasionally flickered into configurations that belonged to different universes entirely. The reality shaper itself defied easy description. It appeared to be a crystalline construct roughly the size of a human adult, but its exact shape seemed to change depending on the angle of observation. Sometimes it looked like an intricate geometric sculpture. Other times it resembled organic forms that suggested alien biology. Most disturbingly, it occasionally appeared to be a mirror that reflected observers' deepest fears about the nature of existence itself. Marcus stood before the viewing portal, studying the artifact with the same focused attention he had given to routine mechanical problems. Around him, the facility's most experienced researchers monitored every instrument reading, checked every safety protocol, and tried to prepare for outcomes that mathematical models suggested were impossible to survive. "The containment fields are stable," reported Chief Engineer Zix Delta, a Krillian whose 6 arms moved in precise coordination as he managed control systems. "All temporal stabilizers are functioning within normal parameters. Dimensional anchors show no sign of stress. Probability cascade monitors are clear," added Dr. Fluxgamma, a Slath whose serpentine form was coiled tight with nervous tension. "Reality coherence index is holding steady at 97% within the chamber." Director Vox Eternal moved between monitoring stations, her ancient crystalline form reflecting colors that indicated centuries of accumulated concern. "Dr. Chen, our protocols require that you confirm your understanding of the risks involved before we proceed." Marcus turned from the viewing portal with the expression that had preceded every major breakthrough in human scientific history. It was also the same expression that had preceded every major disaster, which was what made this moment simultaneously thrilling and terrifying for everyone present. "I understand that this artifact has killed over 200 researchers from 14 different species," he said, with the matter-of-fact tone he might use to discuss weather patterns. "I understand that it fundamentally alters local spacetime in ways that violate basic principles of physics. And I understand that mathematical models indicate a 99.7% probability of immediate catastrophic failure if anyone attempts direct interface with its operating systems." "And you still wish to proceed?" Agent Thrix Omega asked, her silver skin shifting through colors that indicated she was already composing her report about what was likely to be the shortest and most spectacular research disaster in galactic history. "Absolutely," Marcus replied with the cheerful confidence that characterized all human responses to impossible challenges. "But I'm going to approach this differently than previous research teams did." He activated a holographic display that showed his proposed methodology. Instead of trying to study the reality shaper from outside its area of effect, he intended to enter the containment chamber and interact with it directly. Instead of using traditional protective equipment, he had designed a system that incorporated human adaptive capabilities as an integral component of the research apparatus. Most importantly, instead of trying to resist the artifact's reality-altering effects, he planned to work with them. Previous researchers tried to maintain normal spacetime parameters while studying the device, Marcus explained, as diagrams flowed across the holographic display. They used containment fields to protect themselves from its effects, which meant they could only observe the artifact's influence on reality from the outside. But if the reality shaper was designed by beings who existed outside linear time and normal spatial dimensions, then understanding its function requires accepting its operational parameters. Dr. Kethnine studied the methodology with scientific fascination that warred with her survival instincts. "Marcus, what you're proposing is essentially allowing the artifact to alter your personal relationship with spacetime while you remain conscious and aware of the changes." That's the idea, Marcus confirmed. Humans have always been pretty good at adapting to extreme conditions while maintaining cognitive function. Our brains are wired to find patterns and meaning even when our environment changes faster than we can analyze it rationally. Chief Engineer Zix Delta's 6 arms moved in patterns that indicated profound concern. Dr. Chen, the temporal displacement effects alone should result in immediate psychological breakdown. Previous researchers lost coherent consciousness within seconds of exposure. Previous researchers were from species that evolved in stable environments, Marcus replied. Humans evolved on a planet that was constantly trying to kill us in new and creative ways. We developed psychological resilience specifically for dealing with conditions that change unpredictably. He moved to the chamber's entry portal, where specialized equipment waited that had been designed according to his specifications. Instead of traditional protective suits, he wore monitoring devices that would record his biological responses while allowing maximum flexibility of movement. Instead of isolation barriers, he carried instruments that were designed to function within altered spacetime parameters. "Are you certain about this?" Director Vox Eternal asked one final time. "Once you enter that chamber, we may not be able to extract you if something goes wrong." Marcus paused at the portal, considering the question with the same seriousness he had shown toward every challenge throughout his career. "I'm certain that traditional approaches haven't worked. I'm certain that the universe contains mysteries that require new ways of thinking to understand them. And I'm certain that humans have a pretty good track record of surviving impossible situations by adapting instead of resisting." He looked around at the assembled researchers, his expression carrying the kind of determination that had driven his species from stone tools to starships in the span of a few thousand years. "Besides," he added with a grin that reminded everyone present why humans were the only known species to achieve sentience on a Deathworld, "what's the worst that could happen?" The silence that followed this question was so complete that it seemed to extend beyond the normal boundaries of sound into dimensions that hadn't been discovered yet. Marcus activated the portal entry sequence. "Watch this," he said quietly, and stepped into the containment chamber. Reality immediately began to reorganize itself around him. The first change was temporal. Marcus experienced his entry into the chamber from 17 different perspectives simultaneously, each representing a slightly different probability path through spacetime. He saw himself succeeding brilliantly, failing spectacularly, and achieving outcomes that transcended normal concepts of success and failure entirely. Instead of being overwhelmed by the multiplicity of experiences, he found his consciousness adapting to process parallel timelines as naturally as walking. The second change was dimensional. The chamber expanded and contracted around him, existing in configurations that ranged from subatomic to galactic in scale. Marcus found himself standing inside a space that was simultaneously smaller than a molecule and larger than a solar system, with his instruments recording readings from both perspectives without contradiction. The third change was ontological. His relationship to existence itself became fluid, with his identity shifting between being an observer of reality, a component of reality, and reality's method of observing itself. Instead of losing coherent self-awareness, Marcus discovered that human consciousness was flexible enough to maintain continuity across multiple states of being. Through the viewing portal, the research team watched in amazement as readings that should have indicated immediate catastrophic failure instead showed Marcus functioning normally within conditions that violated every principle of physics they understood. "His vital signs are stable," reported Dr. Fluxgamma, her voice filled with scientific amazement. "Somehow, he's maintaining normal cognitive function despite existing in at least 4 different time streams simultaneously. Dimensional readings show him occupying multiple spatial configurations at once," Chief Engineer Zix Delta added. "But his consciousness appears to be integrating all the data streams without suffering psychological breakdown." Inside the chamber, Marcus approached the reality shaper with the same careful attention he had given to every complex mechanism throughout his career. Up close, the artifact was even more impressive. Its crystalline structure seemed to contain entire universes, with each facet reflecting possibilities that extended beyond normal spacetime into realms where different physical laws applied. He began his examination by simply observing, allowing his enhanced awareness to process information about the artifact's operational principles. What previous researchers had interpreted as chaotic reality distortions, Marcus recognized as sophisticated engineering that operated according to multidimensional physics. The reality shaper wasn't malfunctioning. It was working exactly as designed by beings who existed outside the limitations that constrained normal space-time-bound species. "It's beautiful," Marcus said aloud, his voice carrying clearly through the monitoring systems despite existing in 17 different temporal states. "It's not a weapon or a tool for destruction. It's a creation device designed to help reality explore its own potential." He reached out and touched the artifact's crystalline surface. The universe exploded into possibilities. For observers outside the chamber, what happened next defied every principle of physics, mathematics, and logic that galactic civilization had developed over millions of years. Marcus didn't disappear or die or suffer catastrophic dissolution. Instead, he seemed to multiply across infinite probability paths while somehow remaining a single, coherent individual. The reality shaper responded to his touch by activating systems that had been dormant for eons. Its creators had designed it to interface with consciousness capable of existing across multiple dimensional states simultaneously, but no such consciousness had ever made contact with it before. Until now. Marcus found himself experiencing existence from perspectives that transcended normal concepts of life and death, space and time, possibility and actuality. He saw the universe as its creators had seen it, not as a collection of separate objects moving through empty space, but as a single, vast organism exploring its own nature through infinite variations of experience. And he understood with perfect clarity what the reality shaper was designed to accomplish. "It's not reshaping reality," he called out to the research team, his voice somehow reaching them despite speaking from outside normal spacetime. "It's teaching reality how to reshape itself. The previous researchers died because they tried to remain separate from the process instead of becoming part of it." The artifact began projecting information directly into the facility's computer systems, sharing knowledge that had been accumulated by civilizations that existed beyond the current universe's dimensional boundaries. Mathematical theorems that had puzzled galactic minds for millennia resolved themselves instantly. Technologies that had been classified as impossible revealed their operational principles. Cosmic phenomena that had defied explanation showed their underlying patterns. But most importantly, the reality shaper began teaching the assembled researchers how to think in ways that transcended the limitations of single-dimensional consciousness. It shared techniques for maintaining awareness across multiple probability states, methods for processing information that existed outside linear time, and approaches to problem-solving that incorporated paradox as a fundamental tool rather than an obstacle to overcome. Marcus emerged from the chamber 6 hours later, looking exactly the same as when he had entered, but carrying knowledge that would revolutionize galactic understanding of existence itself. "Well," he said with the casual satisfaction that characterized all human responses to successfully completed challenges, "that was definitely interesting. So, what impossible problem should we tackle next?" The silence that followed this question was profound enough to extend across dimensions. Dr. Kethnine realized that she was witnessing the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization. The human approach to impossible problems wasn't just a curiosity or a useful anomaly. It was a fundamental advance in how sentient beings could interact with the universe itself. Other species had developed technology to manipulate matter and energy. Humans had developed the ability to collaborate with reality in exploring its own potential for transformation. And somewhere in the back of her crystalline mind, Dr. Kethnine found herself wondering what would happen when the galactic community discovered that humans hadn't even begun to explore the full extent of their own capabilities. She had a feeling that the universe was about to become a much more interesting place. Director Vox Eternal moved to her communications console and began entering priority codes that would alert the Galactic Council that fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence had just been proven incorrect. "Dr. Chen," she said quietly, "I believe we're going to need a much larger facility." Marcus grinned with the expression that had become the most famous smile in galactic scientific history, and which would soon become the most feared expression in the universe among species that preferred their reality to remain safely predictable. That sounds like fun, he said. What else do you have that nobody's been able to figure out?